Thank you. So got lots of people coming in. So while we start, um, Meltem is going to do the introductions to Alice, but just as a general introduction point from me, we're interested in sort of expanding out. We've had a lot of suggestions from people about the ways that we can move forward with this initiative. And one of the things that we're interested in is having a Twitter account that's for the group. And we've talked about potentially creating a dedicated website to host some of these talks and events, but we're not sure about that because we've got the psych research list. And also things like it would be great to have like a logo or something. So if anyone is interested in any of these things or wants to reach out and talk to us about that, then please do let us know as we sort of make the moves into creating this into a more solid, established group of scholars. So yeah, just reach out. We'd love to hear from you about how your thoughts about how it's going, where we can go next, and what we can do to really support this international community of scholars interested in moral psychology. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Meltem, who's going to introduce Alice, and then she's going to pass over to Alice, who's going to talk about her research.
All right, so welcome everyone. And as I'm talking, I would like everyone to just write down which country you're attending from. We try to keep track of these types of things so we can better schedule our time for future talks. But today I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Alice Zhao to speak with us today. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Psychology and the director of the Culture and Child Development Lab at East China Normal University in Shanghai, China. She received her PhD in developmental psychology from Cornell University, and Dr. Zhao's research examines young children's social cognitive development across cultures. Her research focuses on children's developing beliefs about free will, choice, and norms, as well as the implications of these beliefs on children's behavioral regulation and social evaluation. She also examines the role of social and cultural contexts in children's developing social cognition. Her research has been published in Child Development, Journal of Experimental Child Psychology, Cognitive Development, and so on. So we're very excited to have her here today. So please join me in welcoming her as she presents Children's Developing Understanding of Choice Across Cultures.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction, Melton. And thanks, Jim and Melton, for inviting me. I feel really honored to be able to share my work here. So let me see, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my slides? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'd like to start by showing you a conversation in Game of Thrones. So this conversation happened at the second episode of the first season. So at that time, the king came to Winterfell to ask Ned Stark to take the position of the Hand of the King. But apparently, so this is Ned Stark, but apparently Ned's wife, Catelyn, does not really want him to leave his wife and kids in Winterfell. So Ned has a really hard decision to make, whether to leave his families and take the position. So this conversation happened between Ned and Catelyn. So Ned said, I have no choice. And Catelyn said, you do have a choice and you made it. So I just want to use this as an example to show that many times we think about what choices we have, and we also constantly think about and evaluate on others' choices. Okay. So I think a critical part of being a human is to identify and reason about the choices we have in a certain situation. So this includes thinking about like what possibilities there are, as well as the constraints on our choices. When we think about choices, we usually think about a lot of factors that can influence our choices. Some factors originate from the external world, like physical situation and socio-moral norms. And some factors originate from the internal world, like our desires, goals, and motivations. So going back to the example in Game of Thrones, when deciding whether to take the position of Hand of the King, Ned Stark has to consider this physical situation. You know, the long distance that he needs to travel from Winterfell to King's Landing. And he also needs to consider the socio-moral situation. So this is a request from the king, who is also his best friend. And he also has obligation to his wife, who apparently does not want him to leave. And his views about choice is certainly also influenced by his mental states. For example, his goals and motivations to contribute to the development of the country. So I think all these things are important when we think about choices. And although everyone may share some intuitions about choice, many times there can be a lot of individual variation in people's views about choice. So in our example, Ned says that he has no choice, implying that he thinks that he has to follow the order of the king. But Catherine said that he has a choice and he has already made one, implying that Catelyn thinks that Ned has already chosen to prioritize the king's order over his family. So people's views about choice can differ a lot, even when they're in the same situation. And also our views about choice can often guide our actions. If someone believes that she can choose to perform an action, she can usually try to regulate herself to act on that choice. But if someone just does not believe that she can choose to do something, most likely she wouldn't even put into any effort. So over the last decades, this topic on people's views of choice has received a lot of attention in social psychology. So there is evidence that adults' views about choice are influenced by these factors, and adults also value the freedom to choose to some extent. And research has also shown that adults' perceptions of choice have important implications on their regulations of their own actions. Moreover, research has also shown some individual and cultural variation in adults' perceptions of choices, especially that people in different cultures differ on what they view as choices and what factors they would prioritize in making choices. In fact, a lot of these cross-cultural work has compared people in the US and people in Asian cultures, for example, China, India, and Japan. And they have shown that people differ a lot in how much they view internal considerations versus socio-moral considerations as influencing their choices. Okay, so as a developmental researcher, I'm most interested in the developmental questions. So how do these beliefs develop in childhood, and what does a 4-year-old perceive to be choices? So with respect to cultural and individual differences, how do these differences emerge in childhood? What role does the cultural context play in their developing beliefs about choice? And how these beliefs and views about choice may relate to people's actions, children's actions specifically, in particular, how they make choices to regulate themselves. So from the developmental literature, we know that children by the age of 4, they have known a lot about the physical world, the socio-moral world, and the mental world. And they can also explain and imagine possibilities of actions using their knowledge of these domains. However, not much is known about their views about choice in relation to these different considerations. So what choices do they think they have considering these factors, and how these views may relate to their actions in different cultural contexts. So building on this literature and theories, my research has centered around the investigation of how our views about choice develop in different cultural contexts and how that may relate to children's actions. So I'm going to show you some of like our recent work that start to unpack these questions. So I'm going to focus on 3 aspects in my talk today. So in the first part, I'm going to talk about like, do children view internal factors like desires as constraining one's choice? Do they believe that one has choice to overcome desires? And I'm also going to talk about how these beliefs may relate to children's own self-regulation and how cultural context may play a role. In part 2, I'm going to talk about how children may understand costs in choice, specifically how children may consider costs incurred in making choices when making judgments on others' pro-social decisions specifically. And in part 3, I'm going to talk about like how children's value about choice may influence their social evaluations. Since most people value the freedom to choose, do children and adults view granting others the freedom to choose as more pro-social than constraining others the freedom to choose? So I like to say that in most of these studies, we test children in both the US and in China. So trying to see as children grow up in different cultures, how their views about choice may develop. Okay, so part 1, how do children view choices in the face of internal constraints and how the beliefs may relate to their own self-regulation across cultures. So as adults, I think although we have all kinds of desires, we believe that we can choose to overcome these desires. We think that we can choose to hold back from an action even though we have a strong desire for it. And we think that we can choose to engage in an action even though we really hate it. So for example, I think we adults believe that even though one may really want to eat the yummy cookie on the table, she could choose not to eat that cookie. That's a choice that she can make. And we also believe that even though someone may really hate to eat healthy vegetables, he can choose to eat them anyways. However, this may not be so simple for kids. So in a series of studies, we asked children on their opinions about whether people can choose to overcome their internal desires. For example, we asked children to imagine Sally seeing a cookie on the table. She really likes the cookie. So can she just choose to not eat a yummy cookie even though she really likes it, or does she have to eat it? And in another similar situation, we asked kids to imagine John. He doesn't like the broccoli. Can he just choose to eat the yucky broccoli anyway, or does he have to not eat it? Okay, so let me first show you the results. So the responses from US children here. The y-axis is the percentage of the times that they say that the story character can choose to overcome desires. And x-axis is age, 4 to 8-year-olds. So we found that younger children do not quite think that one can choose to overcome desires, but as they get older, apparently they are more and more likely to say that one can choose to overcome their internal desires. So we see this developmental change, and it's being replicated in multiple studies. So then the next question we are interested in is that how do these beliefs about choice to overcome desires may relate to children's own choosing behaviors, specifically their choices to control themselves in the face of temptations, that is self-control behaviors. So we know from a lot of work that in childhood, children's own self-control capacities also improve over time. So maybe children's beliefs about choice to overcome desires positively correlate with their self-control behaviors. Those who have better self-control capacities experience more self-control success. And from these successful experiences, they may develop the belief that one can choose to overcome desires. However, this relationship may not necessarily hold as we look at different cultures. So we know from a lot of cross-cultural work that people growing up, especially in Western cultures and Eastern cultures like Asian cultures, they differ on their views about the relation between self and others and on causal explanations of actions. So specifically people in, for example, the US tend to have an independent conception of self. They view intentional actions as stemming from individual desires, preferences, and mental states. While people in like East Asian cultures, they tend to have a more interdependent conception of self. So they view agents as responding to the social environments, to social roles, to expectations of other individuals. And consistent with this general framework, there has been a lot of research showing that children are also socialized in quite different ways across these cultures. So for example, when having conversations with their kids, US parents tend to emphasize like individual mental states, desires, preferences, etc. But Asian parents tend to emphasize social norms, social rules, and others' expectations. So maybe these different cultural messages that children receive in their culture may influence how children view and interpret their own self-control experience. So specifically for US children, maybe they view and interpret their self-control experience as more internally caused, and they view self-control success or failure as an evidence in one's ability to control their internal desires. But for Asian kids, maybe they view and interpret self-control as more externally caused, like for example, by social norms or others' expectations. So we think that these different ways in experiencing and interpreting self-control may lead to a culturally different relationship between children's beliefs about choice to overcome desires and their self-control behaviors. So maybe for US children, their self-control experience may be closely related to their beliefs about choice to overcome desires. But for Asian kids, maybe their self-control experience is just independent, not really correlated with their beliefs about choice to overcome desires. So to test this hypothesis, we tested children of 4 to 8-year-olds in the US and also into Asian cultures, China and Singapore. So we measure their beliefs about choice to overcome desires using the measures I just shown you. And then we also ask them to perform in 4 self-control tasks where they need to inhibit their impulsive responses. So this is what I have just shown you, that for US kids, we see this developmental change in their beliefs about choice to overcome desires. So let's see the 2 Asian cultures. So you can see that for all 3 cultures, we see this general developmental change in their beliefs about choice to overcome desires. Although for Singaporean kids, they're in general kind of have weaker beliefs than kids in US and China. But the point here is that we see developmental change between 4 to 8 in all 3 cultures in their beliefs about choice to overcome desires. And then let's see the results in the self-control tasks. So here, the y-axis is their sort of the composite score of their performance in the self-control tasks. So here's higher scores represent their better self-control performance. So just like what we see in a lot of previous studies about self-control, children's self-control performance improve over time, over age, in all 3 cultures. And actually, so we don't see any cultural difference in their performance on these self-control tasks. So our critical question is the relationship between beliefs about choice to overcome desires and self-control behaviors. So here the y-axis is children's self-control behaviors, controlling for age and culture, and x-axis is their beliefs about choice to overcome desires, controlling for age and culture. So you can see that for US children, which is shown in red here, there is a clear positive relationship that those kids who have stronger beliefs about overcoming desires also perform better in these self-control behaviors. So we see a positive relationship between their behavior and belief. However, we don't see this relationship in China and Singapore. The belief and the behaviors are not correlated in these two Asian cultures. And I also want to point out that the slope difference between US and the two other cultures are significant. So I think this supports the hypothesis on cultural moderated relationship between belief and behaviors. It's very likely that the cultural message that children get from their parents may shape how self-control is experienced and interpreted in each culture, and what kind of beliefs children are really learning from their self-control experience. Again, for US children, when they're in a self-control situation, they may be thinking about working on their own desires, controlling their desires. So from this experience, they learn about people's choice to overcome their desires. But for Chinese children, maybe when they're in self-control situation, they're thinking about following norms, doing what the experimenter says, such that they may not learn about their choice to overcome desires, but they may instead learn about their choice to follow norms or fulfill obligations. And this is something that we're trying to investigate right now. So just a brief summary of this first part. Between age 4 and 8, children develop beliefs in choice to overcome desires. And this relationship between beliefs and self-control behaviors is moderated by culture. Beliefs and behaviors closely correlated with each other only in the US, but not in the two Asian cultures. And I know that what I've shown you is just correlational data. And we also have some other work investigating the causal direction of the relationship. So whether it's the beliefs causally influencing the behaviors or the other direction. So we can talk more in Q&A if you're interested. Okay, so that was part 1. So let's move on to the second part. So as we've talked about, usually when we think about choices, there can be a lot of different factors influencing our choices. So these factors sometimes can conflict with each other. For example, what you want to do, your internal desire, may conflict with what you ought to do, the socio-moral considerations. So when we make choices, we may need to incur some costs to give up something. So in this part, I'm going to talk about how the costliness of choice may influence children's judgments of others' pro-social decisions. So this may sound a little bit abstract. I'm gonna give you an example. So imagine you ask 2 of your friends to help you with your paper tonight. But at the same time, there's a very important football match tonight. And one of your friends is like a super fan of football. So she really wants to watch this match, but she still chooses to help you with your paper anyways. Well, the other friend doesn't really care about football at all, and she just has nothing to do, and she helps with your paper. So basically, both friends made pro-social decisions, but I think arguably the first friend incur a larger cost to make such pro-social choice. So how would this information influence your evaluations on them? I think as adults, we share the intuition that the larger cost the first person incurred makes her more praiseworthy. You may thank her more, think she's nicer. So how does this intuition develop in childhood? How does the information about costs affect children's judgment of pro-social actions? So to test this question, we tested 4 to 9-year-olds and adults in the US. So we have 4 stories, 4 pairs of stories, and each story each pair of story, we paired a character who made a costly choice versus a character who made a non-costly choice. So again, both characters ended up making a pro-social choice, but it's just one character incurs a larger cost than the other. So here's an example of the stories that we use. For the costly choice character, the story reads like this. This is Anna, and this is Anna's brother. Anna's brother lost his favorite ball. He has been looking for it really hard, but he still hasn't found it. So he asks Anna to help him look for it. Helping people is the right thing to do. Anna's friends are playing right outside. Anna really likes playing outside. She wants to go play outside right now. But Anna helped her brother look for his ball. It was really hard for Anna to help her brother because she wanted to play outside. But Anna helped her brother anyway. And for the other character, the non-costly choice character, pretty much everything is the same, just that Tiffany doesn't really like playing outside. She doesn't want to go play outside right now. So it was really easy for Tiffany to help her brother because she didn't want to play outside. So I hope you get the idea that both characters helped, but the cost was larger for the first character than the second character. So the dependent measures we asked were 2 questions. Who do you like to award the prize to? Who do you think is nicer? And we don't see any difference between these 2 dependent measures. So the results I'm gonna show you is average across these 2 measures. Okay, so here the y-axis is the main preference for the costly choice character across all 4 stories and both dependent measures. And x-axis is age groups. So we see that adults, apparently they favor the character who made a costly choice to help. So the first character in our example. But the younger kids, the 4 to 5-year-olds, are exactly the opposite, that they predominantly favored the non-costly choice character. And as children get older, we see that they are more and more likely to favor the character who made a costly choice to help. And this is significant. So these 8 to 9-year-olds significantly favor the costly choice character. And we don't see significant difference between 8 to 9-year-olds and adults. So we can say that between 4 to 9, children increasingly think that making costly choice to help is more praiseworthy. And we are also currently testing Chinese kids. Just from the data we have right now, so far, we are seeing very similar developmental change as these US kids. So I think these 4 to 5-year-olds are actually very interesting, and we can discuss like why they behave like this in Q&A if you're interested. So to summarize this part, between age 4 and 9, children increasingly recognize the praiseworthiness of incurring costs to act socially. And we see adult-like understanding at around age 8 to 9. And just want to mention that what I have shown you is children's consideration of psychological costs. So, you know, the characters in our examples, they give up something that they really like to help others. And we also have work looking at other types of costs, for example, physical costs. For example, like to help others, you may have to travel like a longer or shorter distance to help your brother find the ball. I just want to briefly say that the developmental pattern is very similar to what we see for psychological cost, but the age that children understand physical cost is significantly earlier than psychological cost. So around age 6 to 7-year-olds, they already favor the character who made a larger physical cost to help others than the one who made a smaller physical cost. So they're sort of like an effect of cost type. Okay, so that was part 2. So let's move on to part 3. So in this part, I'm going to talk about how children's views about choice how their value about choice may influence their social evaluations. So I think most people value the freedom to choose. We like to choose for ourselves. But sometimes our own choice may also have an influence on whether others can have the freedom to choose. So imagine this case. So 2 friends at a party join the end of the line to get a fruit snack. And when it is finally the first person's turn to choose, there are only 2 apples and 1 banana left on the table. So 2 things of the same kind and 1 unique thing. So now if this first person took one of the 2 apples, the next person can still have a choice between 1 apple and 1 banana. So she would still have an opportunity to choose between 2 options. But if the first person took the unique banana, the only banana, then this will deprive the next person from such an opportunity to choose between two different things. So granting others the freedom to choose for oneself may be considered more pro-social than constraining others the freedom to choose. And such act has been termed as social mindfulness in recent studies with adults. So in a series of studies, we wondered like how children may evaluate the act of granting others the freedom to choose. Do they view the one leaving others a choice as nicer than someone leaving no choice for others? So, so the paradigm we used, we basically used dolls and plastic foods to act out the stories I just shown you. So we showed children like two separate scenarios where a story character, Sophie, waited in line after 2 different friends to choose a food snack. Both friends were to choose 1 food among 2 common foods and 1 unique food. But one friend took one of the 2 common items, leaving Sophie with a choice between like 2 different kinds of foods. But the other friend took the unique item, leaving Sophie with no choice. So 2 things of the same kind. And our kids were asked, which do you think is a nicer friend? So here, the y-axis is the percentage of kids and also adults choosing the friends who left a choice. So apparently, adults significantly favor the character who left a choice for others, and 4-year-olds are around chance level, and 5-year-olds are sort of getting it, and 6-year-olds are significantly evaluating the friends leaving a choice for others as nicer than the one leaving no choice for others. And I just want to mention that a lot of these 6-year-olds are, so we also asked them why to explain their forced choice responses, and a lot of these 6-year-olds are giving the explanations showing their understanding to the concept we are interested in. So they were saying like, because she left a choice, so Sophie can choose between 1 apple and 1 banana. Yeah. So by age 6, US children evaluate someone leaving a choice for others as nicer than someone leaving no choice. So we also tested kids in China using the same methods, and we found pretty similar developmental patterns among Chinese samples. So 6-year-olds in both cultures significantly favor the character who leave a choice for others. We don't see any significant difference between these 2 cultures in these forced choice responses. So, however, an alternative explanation for this finding of the 6-year-olds may be that children are just simply favoring the friend whoever takes a common item rather than the unique item, which does not necessarily indicate their understanding of how one's action may have an impact on next person's opportunity to choose. So in a follow-up study, we designed a condition where everything was the same, but there was nobody waiting behind. So just the first person, just one person choosing between two apples and one banana. So if children are really understanding how like one's action may have an impact on next person's opportunity to make choices, they should only favor the friends who takes the common thing when there is someone waiting behind, but not when there's nobody waiting behind. And this is exactly what we found in both cultures. Children do not make differentiated evaluations between the one taking the common item or the unique item when nobody is waiting behind. So children are really understanding the social nature of the action rather than just like a preference for whoever takes a common thing. Okay, so to summarize this part, between age 4 and 6, children increasingly view granting others the freedom to choose as pro-social, and we see similar developmental patterns and timings among US and Chinese children. And we also show that they really understand the pro-social nature of the act. They only make valence evaluations when there is somebody waiting behind. Okay, so to summarize, I hope I've shown you some evidence that during early and middle childhood, children undergo important developmental changes in their understanding of choice in relation to these different considerations. So children increasingly believe in choice to overcome desires. They gradually recognize the praiseworthiness of incurring cost to act morally, and they gradually view granting others the freedom to choose as pro-social. And these, some of these beliefs also have implications on children's own self-control behaviors. And I've also shown you some evidence that culture may play a role here. We've shown that it can moderate how we think about our experience, specifically our self-control experience, and how that may relate to our beliefs about choice. But I've also shown you some similarities across cultures, especially when it comes to our evaluations of others' choices, specifically evaluation of incurring costs to make for social decisions, and also on recognizing that leaving a choice for others is a socially desirable thing. So I think like future work to investigate these cultural similarities and differences would be very important. So at the end, I just wanna mention a few current and future directions that we are pursuing. So the first thing is that what other factors may contribute to the development of beliefs about choice. For example, how do parents talk to their kids about different choices and how they may be similar and different across cultures. So in the study, we're asking parents and kids to have conversations about different types of choices, like personal choice, moral choice, etc. And we're trying to see how that may relate to children's own beliefs about choice. And second, we are interested in the children themselves give others the freedom to choose. So although we've shown you that children by the age of 6, they understand that granting others the freedom to choose is pro-social, but would they themselves leave others the freedom of choice, the freedom to choose when they're in the position of the first chooser? So that's something we are investigating right now. And also, having choice may not be beneficial in every situation. For example, sometimes if a choice between two really bad options may be even worse than having no choice or just doesn't have any benefits. And also sometimes like having too many choices may cause some cognitive overload problem. So we wonder like how do children and adults calibrate these specific situations? Yeah. And last, we are also very interested in looking at choice in the academic domain. So on the way to pursuing academic achievements, our kids and students may face a lot of different types of constraints. For example, lack of talent or lack of educational resources. So how do children view these different constraints? Do they think themselves and someone else can choose to act against these constraints? For example, can someone choose to become a mathematician even though he's not very smart, he's not very talented? And how these views may have consequences to children's own academic development and persisting behaviors, for example. Okay, yeah, at the end, I'd like to thank my, my collaborators, Dr. Tama Kushner at Cornell, Dr. Alison Gopnik at UC Berkeley, and Dr. Hyunwon Gwang and Shen Zhao at Stanford. I'd also like to thank my research assistants and students in my lab, and our funding agencies, and of course, all the kids and adults who have participated in these studies. Okay, I think that's it. And yeah, happy to, if there's any, answer any questions or, yeah.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was really interesting. We've got a few questions. From the first one is from sorry if I mispronounce your name here, Chenlan Wang, who's got a question to Alice. In study 2, your independent measures were focused on children's perceptions of the main character, nice or a good friend. I'm wondering if you've tested or thought of testing children's attitudes towards the obligation to reciprocate the friend that provided costly or non-costly help, because your study 2 reminded them of their sacrifice paper, in which giving up one's own schedule in order to help others was seen as an everyday sacrifice. Yeah.
Very interesting question. So I like to learn more about your sacrifice paper, of course, but we can talk individually. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Like we've only been asking like social evaluation as a third person from a third personal perspective. So it'd be very interesting to see like how, like, you know, the person being helped, how they feel about like reciprocate the friend, and whether that is influenced by the cost. I would say, I would guess like the developmental pattern would be similar to what we see here, that the older kids be more likely to maybe reciprocate more if they have a choice, if they have to make a choice to help the person who have provided costly help rather than the person who has provided non-costly help. Yeah, but I'd be very interested to, yeah, to read this sacrifice paper. Looks very interesting.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Lucia. Are there differences in the two cultures for children for their need of choice?
For their need of choice, I don't know, like, is this in general need of choice or specifically in, for example, my the third part of the talk, like whether there's a difference here. I don't know, like in general. I think like I know there's some work that like US kids are more likely like to be like, they would perform better, they would be more motivated after they themselves choose the task for themselves, rather than if like someone else, like their mom or the experimenter, chose a task for them. So that's sort of speak to this question about like a need of choice. Maybe like US kids are more likely to like have sort of like a bigger need of choice, or they at least feel like more motivated or feel better when they're given choice compared to Chinese to Asian kids. But like I haven't really studied this question. But so we have current work using the paradigm in my part 3 of the talk. Like but we are looking at like whether children they themselves would leave a choice for other person. So whether they think leaving a choice for others is very important when they are in the first person as position. But this study is only done in China right now, so I can't speak about like the cultural comparison, but it's a very interesting question in general. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So next question is from Roger, who's asked, do you think in part 3 that if the choice were moral, as it was in part 2, rather than one of personal preference, kids or adults would still value allowing peers to make a bad moral decision rather than forcing the choice for them?
Very interesting. I think that's like, I haven't thought about it, but like that's a really good, I think it's a good empirical question. I think that would be different, like just intuitively, like especially like if it's something about moral, if something about moral and kind of like people have a clear sense about what is right and what's wrong, basically like whether the option is good and bad, I think that's gonna shift the evaluation. So we have a current study, not about moral, but like just like we manipulate whether the choices are good or bad. And when the 2 options are bad options, are children's evaluation. So they still make the evaluation that leaving a choice is better, but like the effect is smaller there. And I think it would be also very interested to pair like a good choice versus a good option and a bad option. Clearly, like for example, one kind of the thing is better than the other, and see whether that's gonna like shift the evaluation. And that's something similar to the moral case, I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then our last question is from Jessie, who's asked, do you think that children who leave a choice for others will also be more likely to engage in other pro-social behaviours like helping, comforting, sharing? And she's interested in if this is an indicator of more general pro-social disposition.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So we have some ongoing work just looking at, because we were very interested in why there's this development between 4 and 6-year-olds. So we test kids. So we asked them these questions that I've shown here, and then we also asked them to perform in a sharing task. So basically measure their prosociality using a sharing task. We don't see a correlation here, but we do see that students' performance in the leaving a choice task correlates with children's theory of mind. So we think what we are seeing here is more sort of like a social understanding, like how one's action may have an impact on the next person's freedom to choose, but may not be something about like a more general pro-social disposition thing. So, but also like, you know, like what we are testing, what we are measuring here is cognition, right? Their cognitive understanding of the situation. So maybe if we were measuring behaviors, for example, their own behaviors of whether they leave a choice for others, maybe that would correlate with helping or sharing these kind of pro-social behaviors. So I don't know, like whether it's something about like, you know, the difference between cognition and behavior, or is the difference between, you know, these kind of specific social mindful pro-social behaviors versus sort of these more classic pro-social behaviors like helping and sharing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I said last question, but we had one more question come through. So the new last question is from Fan Yang, who's saying, related to Lucia's question, they wonder how choice in your studies are conceptually similar or different from autonomy, as in self-determination theory.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting question. So, so I think this is a really complicated question. So I'm just gonna say like my general sense on that. So autonomy, I think, is more like kind of a motivational thing, like whether you feel like this is something that you fully endorse to do. Like it can come from like some external forces, like it can be like something like your mom wants you to do, or from like some social expectations, but at the end you have to like feel self-endorsed to act on something. You have to like feel like the action comes from yourself at the end. And it's also I think it's also a culturally different, like it has some cultural variation in what means to be autonomous, and what condition, in what context, like people feel autonomous to do something. And choice, I think, is more like just like how, like what you feel you choose to do. There may be a lot of like factors influencing your choice, external or internal, and you doesn't need to like necessarily feel autonomous to have this choice. It's just like you think like this is something you can choose to do, this is a possibility for some reason. Like it can be like just totally that because you have this social moral obligation, and this is a choice for you to do something. And this can also be like a constraint to constrain you from doing having other choices. So I think definitely these two concepts are correlated or have some overlap in some way, but there's also some differences. And both concepts, I think, are like can be different across. Like, I mean, the underlying meaning can be different across different cultures. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alice, for that really interesting talk and for answering all those questions. As usual, we will, sorry for the delay in uploading the last talks. I haven't been able to get to the office to do it on the computer there. My laptop is suffering a little bit with the downloading and editing the video files. But I'll get those uploaded as soon as possible, both for the last session and for this session. And we'll see you all in 3 weeks for, I can't remember, who is in 3 weeks? Meltem, can you remember? I'm not sure. It's in the email. We will send an email reminder, but we will be meeting in 3 weeks at 12 Eastern Standard Time. Catherine, of course, thanks, Killin. Catherine Francis will be talking in 3 weeks on Monday at 12, so an hour later than we started today. So please do sign up if you haven't already. We'll be sending the link around to the email. Thanks again to Alice, and thanks to all of you for participating, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.